Hey, and welcome to Foolproof Theology. It is great to be with you. I'm really excited about my guest, Andrew Isker. He's on the podcast today. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, sign up so you can stay tuned, stay in touch. Go on to my Patreon, sign up with the link in the show notes. That's going to help the show a lot. Today, we're going to be talking about Andrew's book, Christian Nationalism. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Well, this is great. I've been following you on Twitter. I didn't know it was you. I just saw kind of this super spicy account, Boniface Woodchipper or something. I was like, what has gotten in this guy's crawl? Because like he just kind of seems to have no filter sometimes, and everybody, he's able to pick a fight with anyone. But you can go follow him there, and I don't resent that. But you wrote this book. First, I wanted to hear, if you wouldn't mind, a bit about your story. I mean, from what I understand, and I'm gonna kind of introduce it this way. You're a pastor in Minnesota.
Yep.
It's a small town, small church. I don't believe it's denominationally affiliated. So you're there kind of I'm going to call it the middle of nowhere, not as an insult, but just kind of like geographically it's in the middle of nowhere. But how did you kind of get there? Yeah. Do you? Okay. How did you kind of end up in that place?
Well, I ended up in this place, because this is where I came out of the womb.
Okay, great.
And I've ventured out beyond here, in my life, but we came back to my hometown in 2018. But before that, I served as a pastor in a couple Series C churches, small Reformed denomination, in West Virginia and in Missouri. And then before that, I was in Idaho. There's this guy up there that maybe some people have heard of, named Doug Wilson.
Oh,
yeah. You could Google, actually don't Google him.
Google that.
Don't Google him. But he trained me at Greyfriars Hall. I went there after I finished college at Minnesota State, just half an hour from my hometown. So I left the Shire of southern Minnesota to go to Idaho and then venture out into the world. And then eventually, we were able to make our way back home. And the church I grew up at was a tiny church, and it had been in a different denomination. And the pastor was nearing 80 years old, and he wanted to retire. In the district that they were in, since the church was so small, he told him, well, if you retire, we'll just shut down the church unless you find someone to replace you. So he told me that. And my grandpa and my great grandpa were, helped found that church. So I didn't want to see it die. So he's like, he knew that, so he's a shrewd old fella.
That's clever.
And he goes, so it's going to die unless you take it over. And I'm like, oh man, okay, well, I guess I will. So I accepted a call there in 2020, and have been there since. Right as kind of everything was locked down, as we came out of the lockdown, I got started there, and I've been ministering there ever since, and we've slowly grown, even though it's very, very small town. I mean, we're 9,000 people in my town. 2,000 of them are incarcerated in a federal prison. So really it's a town of 7,000. For all intents and purposes. And so very, very small rural town, and it's very economically depressed here as well. At like much of the Midwest, and so it's you're in church planting and Acts 29 and all that stuff. So how it all works. Like that's probably like the least ideal place to go plant a church is in a town of like 7,000 that's rural, that doesn't have a lot of money, and doesn't have a lot of prospects going for it. But it's my hometown, and so these are my people, and I want them to be taught God's word. I want them to worship faithfully on the Lord's Day, and I want people to know the Lord. So and particularly the people that I know, that I grew up with, that I care greatly for. And so and that was kind of the case every time my wife and I went back home for Christmas or on summer, in the summer. for vacation. We'd come here and we thought, man, it would be so great if we could, because she's from Minnesota as well, and it'd be so great if we could, move back here someday, maybe plant a church someday. But we always knew, oh, that's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. Like, there's no way we could have a church that I could be here and it would pay. They'd be able to do it vocationally. They could pay me. The Lord found a way for that to happen. And so we've been immensely grateful ever since we were able to move back.
That's amazing. I love that. And so you've had to navigate, I mean, tell me, like, because I'm in Boulder, so obviously it's a more progressive climate. Yeah. We knew that. That wasn't shocking to us. Like when COVID hit, it's like, well, duh, we're going to be the most progressive. They're trying to be like San Francisco. But, we navigated it and we kind of flew under the radar in terms of any kind of, controversy or anything like that. We did attend some like public health hearings, and some of our elders were like using anon names, like George Washington or something like that. Something silly. But we were really, we were trying to do our best to navigate different people in our church. And so you being a pastor over the last couple of years in that kind of rural environment, was COVID kind of already like not a thing anymore and y'all were gathering on Sundays? Or what was it like when you entered into that?
Yeah, let's see. So it was summer of 2020 that I started preaching just about every Sunday. And, where we are, nobody wore masks anymore for the most part at that time. Yeah. We still had the mask mandate in Minnesota, but it was, where we are, no one really followed through with it. You could go to the convenience store or around town, and there were very few places that they would, make you do it. The hospital obviously would be one, and Walmart was basically the only other one. They had security guards posted up at the door because all of the angry rural people were throwing fits every time they, I don't blame them. But they had to like hire a security company to like with big German shepherds out in front of the store.
Gosh, that's crazy.
yeah. It was like we're in the Soviet Union, but East Germany here. But anyway, it was it was for the most part people were just over it, by 2020, and. Yeah, the attitude obviously very, very different here. Although, the churches in town, I was just kind of getting my feet wet in terms of the where the churches were at, all the different churches in our town.
Sure.
And so most of them remained locked down long after the governor had lifted it for churches. Because I think they had gotten used to doing the live streams, and they were, they kind of followed their cues from their various denominations more than the cultural climate where they're at. So there's a lot of consternation among the churches and a lot of sorting and shifting among people. And that's, some of the people that's, where a lot of my new people that have come to our church have come from is like, here's like, especially when the, after the vaccine mandate stuff happened, I wasn't employing this as like a church growth, strategy, but these guys would come up to me and they'd be like, hey, my job is making me get a vaccine because of the mandate and everything, and I want to do a religious exemption. So they'd be talking to me. They just knew me and where I stood on things. And I'm like, well, yeah, sure, I'll help you out however you want, and whatever you need, I'll do it. And then afterward, I'm like, wait a minute, these guys belong to a church. Why aren't they having their pastor do this? Do this stuff?
Yeah, right.
And then they tell me, and they're like, he wouldn't do it because he didn't want to take a stand on this. And so, I just did because I knew this is right. And all these guys are like, well, I want to go to your church. It's weird. You have this weird, high church liturgy. I'm used to the Chris Tomlin songs and all that kind of stuff. Probably the stuff that you guys, do at your church. So they come to mine and they're like, I'm not super into this. Like, this is like Lutheran church I grew up in, but the preaching's really good. You preach the Bible. And so, and so that's kind of how my church has stood out, where I am just because I'm not like going out of my way to be this like Trumper or something or this mega guy or anything like that. It's just that naturally flows out of, applying, what you believe, what the scripture teaches and to life. So anyway, people have appreciated the earnestness of it because I don't know. It's a lot of church stuff. See, even in a small rural town, among evangelicals, it seems to be kind of, we don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to. We do it our application and our sermons by consensus. What will step on the fewest number of toes, things like that. And I'm just like, Leroy Jenkins, just
here comes Andrew.
here's what the Bible says, and I don't care what you think, because I care what God thinks more.
Right.
And so it's kind of the not quite the prophet Jonah,
Sure.
Church growth strategy. Like, here's what God says, and turn or burn. But it's I think ultimately people, they want someone to tell them the truth, to stand firm on things, and to to show some backbone, not back down on things. And my thing that I always told, all sorts of different, friends and people around here is that, like, look, if I wanted to have the biggest church in town, if I wanted to do all the marketing things and all the things that we view as, success, sure, I could do all that stuff, and I could do it really well. And none of you would know at all what I think about anything. And there'd be a lot of people coming to see it. I'd give these really great meaningless TED Talks on Sunday
Sure.
morning, and you'd be entertained. I'd tell some jokes and it'd be fun. But it would benefit no one in any meaningful way. And so that's been my, I wouldn't say strategy, just my mode of being.
Sure. Yeah.
And you referenced it, the tweeting, the Twitter. That's kind of the space, I don't know, where I can, think out loud or say things out loud. But a lot of it is, so many people are so afraid to just be honest about things. And yeah, I don't really actually ever look to fight people.
Okay.
It's more like, why is this guy saying this? This is wrong.
Yeah, right.
No one's saying anything. You feel compelled. Like, I have to say something here.
Yeah.
And so that's more so just the general mode of being, that I'm not out looking for fights, because if I was, like, then that's all I would do all day. And you see people like that, where it's like, all they want to do is pick fights and be obnoxious. Mine is like, there's a handful of things where I'm like, I'm not going to put up with this, and and you have to you go at it. But it's more so like, I care about what's true, and all of this. I mean, some of it, especially like my public, online persona or presence or whatever you want to call it, stems back to really 2015, 2016, around there. I noticed that, like, people where I come from, my people from, rural, middle of nowhere towns, are hated. They hate people like in my town. They hate the guys that, like to go ice fishing and drink Busch Light and ride snowmobiles and hang out at the American Legion. Like, they hate people like that.
Yeah.
I remember, it was funny. I had a conversation, bringing up Doug recently. He remembered, kind of how I thought about things 10 years ago when I was with him in Moscow. And he's like, well, what changed? Why are you, why is your thinking changed so much? And it really was that Kevin Williamson National Review piece from, like, early 2016, where he said, like, the white working class needs to die. That was the name of his National Review Online article. And it was the day before like Super Tuesday, and I was in Missouri at the time. And I contented myself to be like, just check out of politics and vote. Like, I told him, like, well, we're not going to vote for this, president. Like, Trump is amusing and everything, and it's been entertaining, but we're not going to vote for him or anything. And then I see that article, and I'm like,
I'm done.
All right, we're going to vote for Trump. Because these people hate my people, my people from, that I grew up with, that, work as, plumbers and electricians and drive trucks and just, do the kind of stuff that makes civilization continue. And so anyway, I was like, okay, and so anytime, like, people like where I come get attacked, especially within the larger evangelical sphere. You see the big shots, the Russell Moores and people like that attacking, working class and middle class evangelicals as these, racist hillbillies that hate, they're so full of hate and just so terrible. That like gets my hackles up. I want to defend my people, in all sorts of different ways. Whether it's the vaccine stuff or whether it's
Sure.
Whether it's voting for a guy that like actually fights for their interests. Things
Sure.
like that. So
yeah, I think that makes sense. I think for me, like it was like a similar awakening in 2020, where it was like between BLM and COVID. And I was watching what was being told to me while I was kind of seeing reality. And really, God really broke me of a lot of hypochondria, honestly, where I was like, I got pneumonia when I was like 8. And so I had always been scared of getting really sick. And so what God used COVID to do for me was break me of a lot of fear of dying, which, sounds weird as a pastor. You should be bold. But as I was thinking about that, I posted like an R.R. Reno article, how we shouldn't fear death. And I shared it online, and I was like, oh, this is helpful. This is some of the stuff I'm processing. I want to share it with other people. And man, people were so mad. And I was like, wait, what's happening? Like, have we all just adopted kind of this inability to think about things reasonably? And then I'm like, oh no, it's everyone. Like Ed Stetzer's in his basement broadcasting, doom and gloom. Like you're going to have pine boxes in your church sanctuary. That's how many people are going to die. And then Andy Crouch is posting how the world is going to change. And don't we love it? Don't you love it? Innovation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you people are demented. Like, no, it's bad. And also we should be courageous. And then BLM hits. And so I felt the same way, where I was like, no one's talking about it. Why is no one saying anything? Well, I'm going to say something. And then, people get upset and all this stuff, and they think you're trying to like fight everyone. I'm like, I'm not. I'm just trying to fill something for especially my people. I saw a lot of people in my church kind of listening to a lot of these regime evangelicals who are just kind of parroting these talking points, and really, it's really like not insightful ways to think about politics, about the church or culture, or anything like that. And so they've been reading them for years though, and I didn't know this. And so I would say something on Twitter, and it's like they would be like, well, you disagree with David French. I'm like, who? Like, and they're like, David French. I'm like, I don't. So I go to David French. I'm like, oh yeah, definitely disagree with that guy. But they've been discipled by him for years now. And I've been guilty of that with like more. I thought Onward was like this great book. I wanted to give it out in my church. And so now I'm having to reap the consequences of my own kind of faulty approach to cultural engagement. So all that to say, I kind of resonate with not the sensitivity so much as like the attunement to the usefulness of that thing. So that kind of gets us to where we want to go though with your book. So you're a pastor. I really love hearing your heart for your town, your people, wanting to see more people come to know Jesus, wanting to minister to those you have, build them up in the truth of God for all of life. That's fantastic. You write a book on kind of a term that's been thrown around a lot, Christian nationalism. How did that come to be? Are you already thinking about this stuff? Were you already kind of like hoping to write something for your people, and then it just went, off from there? What was that like?
Yeah. I guess, I mean, a lot of it was, it stems from, that same spirit of, I was seeing, after this term had been thrown around a lot, over the last year or two. And I remember seeing, I can't remember who I first saw really run with it. Maybe it was Russell Moore. Maybe it was some of these other guys like Paul Miller or Scott Coley, like these guys that are online,
right,
talking about the danger of Christian, or Sam Perry, all the so scary, it's so bad. And then I heard them like kind of define it. Like part of it is like they want to leave it really, really vague because then they could keep shifting the goalposts.
Yep.
But when they began to define it, I thought, well, that's just, regular evangelical folks who want to have a country that reflects what they believe about the world, that they love their country. They want to see it, be peaceful and well ordered. They want to do what the Bible says and live quiet and peaceable lives. where they could just where they could just go have their jobs, raise their families, live in peace, and not see their country get destroyed by crazies.
Yep.
And so they're driven to vote for someone that says that presents a vision, to accomplish those ends, in Trump. And they wanted to demonize these people, that supported Trump. That really is the main thing. They wanted any Christians, any evangelical Christians. That's the major block of support that Trump had, was
Sure.
evangelical Christians. They bring that up constantly.
Yep.
So they want to demonize those people. They want Christians to be divided over this, and to think that there's something sinful or wrong about having supported Trump. And it really got to a fever pitch after the mostly peaceful electoral justice protests,
Yep.
on January 6th, on
Sure.
Epiphany. The Epiphany protests, and
Oh my.
and so,
So
and
many
so anyway,
layers.
I know, right? And anyway, like they love using pictures of like the guy that had the big cross, in front of the Capitol,
Yep.
and things like that, and saying, well, it's Christian nationalism that caused this, near, insurrection of the government, and so anyway, like that's, since then, I mean, it really got a ton of attention once the January 6th committee started having hearings and so forth. So I'm watching this, and I'm seeing, my people being demonized for, frankly, really mundane beliefs.
Sure.
and so I just took, I looked at this phrase, and I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with a nation being a Christian nation. I mean, some of it's based on these kind of presuppositions that are, just this secular democratic, liberal world order, that kind of came into being, after the Second World War, that you just have this globalist system, this global world order that, presupposes, just democratic, secular, countries across the globe.
Yep.
And so they say, well, you can't have, within that system, you can't have, explicitly Christian nations, because you have to be totally secular. You have to be pluralistic. So that's very bad. I mean, that's what they talk about, is that it's just very bad for anything like that. And you look at history, it's like, well, for 1,000 years or more of Christendom, that's just what was. You just had, every country was explicitly Christian. The king was a Christian king or a Christian prince. And so there was a ton of cognitive dissonance in my mind. Like these things don't, add up at all. And so from that point, I'm seeing this, observing this, and I'm writing. I'm starting to write stuff, and different articles, and I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with nations existing.
Mm.
That some of it. So there's, really two issues. One, are nations, a bad thing, right? Is it a bad thing for there to be nations as opposed to this globalist system where it's just like one giant nationless existence, where where the United States is kind of this empire over the whole world,
Right.
and dominates it, and there's really no borders. There's really no national differences among throughout the world. They want to demonize that as much as possible. And so it's like, well, no, that's not a sinful thing or not a wrong thing to have, distinct nations.
Yep.
And so that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand is like, well, is it wrong for a nation to be majority Christian and to have its laws and national culture, derived from the Christian faith? And I mean, if you're going to say that, then you have to say that, most of the history of the church is wrong and sinful. So it makes absolutely no sense.
Well, yeah, and on that point, I think it's really important to point out, because there are Christian nations right now on planet Earth.
Yeah.
They just all happen to not be white. And so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
ironic that they want to attack these Christian nationalists, this ideal, which you just laid out, is a very simple paradigm. There are nations. It's good to be nations. There are, it's not some kind of like homogenous melting pot of identities and all this kind of stuff. And there are borders, and that's good. And then there's also, can those nations that exist have a Christian identity and be majority Christian and base their laws on Christianity? Yes. But if you're not, if you're white, no, because that's wrong. Right, yeah. But if you're like if you're on a different continent somewhere far away where we don't have to see you, then yeah, sure, try that experiment somewhere else. And so I think it's very intuitive. And I think for me, kind of my journey, whether I adopt a moniker or not, the reason it's an interesting phrase and I'm more interested in the philosophy behind it, is because for so much of my upbringing, I kind of disdained this kind of Christianity where it was like patriotic Sundays and flags on the stage and all this kind of stuff. But I think what really struck home for me, and the sad thing about the GAE and the global American empire, where it's just kind of everywhere. And I used to love traveling, because when you travel, you get to actually experience different people and see how they worship God differently, or maybe you get to see how they eat different food and all this kind of stuff. And now you travel. I was over in England this summer, and I was like, I mean, there's nothing unique here. It's all American. It's all just generic. Starbucks everywhere. There's nothing unique about their identity. Its culture is just flattened, and there's no appreciation for differences. It's actually just it's very sad, to travel now, because you can just get anything anywhere, with Amazon, and it's just global, which there are advantages to that. Okay. Like, food, and stuff being available to people. So I'm not trying to just totally throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it makes one sad to travel anywhere. Even when I go back to Texas, where I'm from, it's like, well, now we have the same stuff in Colorado that we have in Texas. There's no sense of loss if you leave one place and another. You used to not get good Tex-Mex here in Colorado, and now those places are coming here. Now I can eat Whataburger, an hour away.
I know.
It's so weird.
Or even just, this is probably, some people listening to this will probably, be upset at this, but like we have, or me criticizing this, but like we have Chick-fil-A's in Minnesota, right. And like that shouldn't be. I should have to go to a place where they have a draw to
be in Atlanta.
Chicken. Yeah, exactly. Like they should not be here. It should not be in a place where it gets below zero. And I don't like it. I mean, my wife, when she listens to this, she'll be angry with me for saying this.
Sure.
But I don't like it. I don't like that they're here. Because that was when we would go, as a kid, we'd get in the station wagon or the conversion van and go down to Florida on vacation, and we'd stop in Georgia and we'd go to this, I couldn't even pronounce it because I couldn't read the cursive,
Sure.
But I just saw the red sign place, and they had really good lemonade, and it was a real treat to go to that. Yeah. And now it's like, well, it's everywhere. And everything has been, throughout the United States it's this way. I mean, when I was in high school, my family went to Europe. We went to Paris. And my parents are not, I don't want to, break the fifth commandment and criticize, criticize
Sure.
my parents, but they're not people of like high culture.
Sure.
And so we're walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, and there's the stereotypical, and this is when Paris still was, really nice. Now I don't think I'd even want to go there because it's a dump. But we're walking down the Champs-Élysées, and you see the like red checker tablecloths in the middle of the street, and these cafes where people are eating escargot and things like that. And I'm like, oh, can we go there, please? I want to try this food, And my parents like, that's too many euros. No, you won't even eat it. And so we kept walking, went to a Subway. In Paris, and the only thing that was unique about it was they had a bunch of different flavors of Fanta that we don't get in the United States.
Sure,
like that was the only thing. That was like my cultural, dining experience. That was my Rod Dreher globetrotting, experience, was eating a Subway in Paris, France in like 2003.
That is funny.
But it was. That's it. Like everywhere. That even after, I remember a poignant illustration of this is like immediately after like the sanctions on Russia hit. Like the first thing to go are like the Adidas stores and the McDonald's and the Starbucks and everything. And it's like, oh man, how are the Russians going to live without those things? And it's like,
right.
Oh, they actually like kind of have their country back to a certain extent, like freed from the clutches of the globalist American empire. Just like that's a powerful symbol. I mean, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, all of these places become like that breezeway picture. You know what I'm talking about, like the breezeway, Pennsylvania, with like all of the
All the
chain
signs.
restaurants. That I mean, it's ubiquitous on social media. It's like that becomes every Eastern European country, every African country, every South American country becomes that. And they lose what makes them unique and human. And so that's the thing I think we all see, and like even we would travel a lot when I was a kid. My dad was a truck driver, so we'd go with him all over the country, and so I got to see a lot of the United States from a very early age, and see the things that makes that make these different places in the country very unique. Whether it's the South or the Midwest or the East Coast or the Northeast or the West Coast, the mountains, like all of it. It was fun going to see these places and see people talk differently, all of this. And it's even in my lifetime, it's become so homogenized, and not just like the food places, but just the culture, is everyone acts the same way, thinks the same things. There's nothing unique about anywhere other than, maybe you have a few unique local, foods that you eat, but that's it. Like there's not an identifiable feature or features anymore in our country, and that's happened throughout the whole world. And I think, I mean, ultimately, to get it into like the meta level, I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it'll last forever. And I think even this last year, you're kind of seeing the fractures of the globalist system begin to show up. That you can't. I mean, it's nice in terms of like economic efficiency and productive output to be able to export certain industries all over the world, because then it broadens out the division of labor and so forth. But it also makes an incredibly fragile system, and you see this in the last 2 years with COVID, when supply chains break down, and then with war being broken down even further. I mean, there's huge, possibly catastrophic disruptions to basic ways of life that are on the horizon, and I think a lot of it is it sets up this very fragile house of cards. So yeah, I mean, it's nice that we're able to produce food and get it across to everywhere in the world.
Sure.
But it also makes a lot of like hundreds of millions or billions of people extremely vulnerable to things that are outside of their local political and economic control. So I mean, I didn't think we'd go through a whole geopolitical conversation here.
but I think it plays into Christian nationalism, just because part of the reason with Christian nationalism, at least as a moniker, it can be appealing for people, is what's lost in kind of the globalism is a sense of particularity. And I think, honestly, as a pastor, when I'm pastoring people, I see this in a lot of people I'm pastoring, because with the opposite of particularity, you get kind of this sense of like vagueness, is what we call it, is where someone really has no identity, no sense of like who they are, where they come from, what they're about, what they're passionate about, what they love. I see this in a lot of men today, where they're kind of like middle-class dudes, and they really don't have a sense of self. It's not like they're even passionate about sports. Like, just give me something. Tell me you love hockey and I'll fight you, because I don't, or tell me you love a sports team, or like, what is your favorite food, or like, what do you watch? And there's no sense of identity. And I think that's a symptom of a greater kind of lack of particularity with a people, with a state. I mean, I come from Texas. Texas has a great regional identity, but even that is lost. And that was one of the things when we planted in Colorado, I noticed immediately that was going to be a huge loss for my kids, is there's not really a state identity here other than like skiing and smoking pot and having fun. I'm like, well, I don't want my kids, like, skiing is fun and all, but like with Texas, it's like the Alamo and these legends, and CPR, Colorado Public Radio, which is like NPR, right? What they celebrate here is the Sandy Creek Massacre, when all these Native Americans were slaughtered. And I'm like, is that the best story we're going to tell our kids? Look, we can argue about the tragedy of that and why that was wrong to do and all that kind of stuff. But like, that's the thing they want to, like, the news the other night featured it. And I'm like, when are you guys going to like have an actual identity? And so we have this loss of particularity. And I think that's where Christian nationalism, my mom asked me the other night, what is that? What is Christian nationalism? And I was just trying to explain it to her. And I think your book would be a really good intro book to that. And I think you've said that. When you think about the average reader of your book, were you thinking about somebody who goes to your church, a book they could pick up and understand? What were you thinking about there?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote it, because it's me and my other co-author, Andrew Torba. We wrote it. I mean, and both of us, like his dad was a truck driver. My dad was a truck driver. We're thinking of like books that are my dad doesn't really read very much. He listens to stuff, so we would listen to, Rush Limbaugh on the radio in the truck growing up all the time. And so I'm thinking about that kind of guy, like if he was going to pick up a book, if his son bugged him enough to read this thing, and he finally did, one, it would have to be short. That's like one of the criticisms we get is like, why isn't this 700 pages long? This is way too short. And why is the font so big? It's like, well, we wrote it for, guys who have jobs that don't have time to read and don't ever read to read books. And for regular people, it's not a book for scholars. It's not a book that is we're going to have, 1,000 footnotes where, we explain and nuance every last thing. It's a book that lays forth ideas and presents a particular vision for the country, and not even presenting necessarily this a novel or unique thing, but really when the country first began, what was it? When the people that originally settled America, right? What were their goals and aspirations? What were they doing? What were they as a people? And I mean, they were all Christians, and they were creating a new nation as Christians, and for their posterity, for their children to have a Christian nation, and be a Christian people. And they had a very clear and keen understanding of what that meant. And over the centuries, and particularly in the last century, that's been lost. That's been eroded, taken away. And now it's to the point where, growing up, we'd learn about the Pilgrims, and the original settlers of the United States. And when I'm listening to Russell Moore or to Samuel Perry or to these guys that criticize Christian nationalism and the rhetoric that they use, I think about, the people in the Mayflower, hearing what these guys are saying, right, and thinking, oh, you guys are wrong to do this. This is bad. This is racist and horrible and evil. And like that's really, really, like, think about all the criticisms that they levy about the people that were in America for the first 200 years that created a new nation. All of them, were explicitly Christians. Even like the Jamestown colony, people think, oh, they wanted to go there and get gold and make a whole bunch of money. You look at the documents and you look at the way they would write about what they were doing, and one of the primary motivations was to bring Christianity to this new world. And so, anyway, I hear these criticisms about, like, this is insane. Are you saying that all of these people were wrong and sinful and bad for doing this? And of course they weren't. Of course they were not. And so it's a lot of it is just a recovery of that same vision for our country, and to say that it's a good thing. I mean, you grow up in school and you learn about your country, and at least in the history that I was taught, that isn't really being taught anymore. That wasn't this unvarnished, it wasn't this, thing where they present in this unvarnished way, and America's this sinful, horrible place. We did all these great evils. Like we knew about the things that were done. We knew about the warts and all of American history, but overall, it was a thing to be proud of. Our heritage and our people, and so it's a recovery of that, of saying that America is a good place. It had a good founding, and we want to recover the same spirit that led people to create a Christian nation where one did not exist. And so, it's, the context is a little different, because we have a nation that is increasingly, especially from the top down, increasingly hostile to the Christian faith. And they see it as a threat. I mean, that ultimately, that's what it is that they see sincere Christian belief as something that will totally upend their plans and their designs for humanity.
Sure.
Is if people are Christian, and some of it, like the things that you're describing, you know, about how people are just listless. They have no identity. They have no place or people that they belong to. They're just atomized individuals who are consumers. Like all they exist for is to consume pot and fast food and pornography. And like, that's life. It's like, I work all day and then I can go do these things. And that's my existence. Like, I have no purpose beyond that. Like, have a family, don't, it doesn't really matter. There's no connection to anything that's preceded them or anything that's going to exist after they're gone. And it's by design. It's not by happenstance. It's not by accident. Like, the people that rule us want us to be that way. They want, the guys that you're ministering to be that way. They don't want you to have, this very clear mission that you're on, this very clear purpose, very clear people that are yours, that you belong to, the things that make life worth living. They don't want you to have that. They want you to just be worried about, like, what the next Marvel movie is that's going to come out. Get excited for that. And that's it. That's all it is. And so anyway, it becomes a huge threat to the whole program. If now you're like, oh, I'm a Christian and I want my nation to be faithful to Jesus. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like you're not murdering 1 million babies a year. It looks like not, legally protecting all sorts of, sexual insanity and all down the line, all of these things, all of the culture war-y kind of stuff like that. That's what happens. Then you have, then you have an actual, fight over those things.
Yeah. It's
they
hard
don't want
like,
that at all.
I'm frustrated on two fronts. Well, I have a frustration and a question. One is like, look, I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm not like, it's a funny Chad meme to say, Christian nationalism is a threat to our democracy. And the Chad is like, yes, like, and that's clever because that's how they perceive it. And it is, I mean, like, the rule of Christ permeating all of life in every sphere of society and every domain for their project. I mean, practically, yes, it is a threat to that way of living. And so if you want to call it that, that's what it is. That's not what it's set out to be necessarily, but that's just implicitly what is. And I think a lot of Christians are really uncomfortable with that because we've been kind of inoculated into this version of Christianity where, love your neighbor means never upset them, never be a threat, never do something different than them, and vote just like them so that they'll eventually like bump into you and say, hey, why do you behave a little bit different than me? Why don't you cuss as much? And then what does that mean? You can do a Jesus juke, and like I've talked about that with Josh Dawes previously, so we didn't need to get into all that. I think the question I have is the word nationalism itself, it's an ism, so people use it for all sorts of purposes. And so I've got a friend that's written on why nationalism is demonic. They're trying to kind of paint this philosophical picture of nationalism being this. You'll get others who are slow adopters. You'll see a lot of heat, especially so like Pentecostals right now are very, very hot on patriotism. I mean, they always kind of have been, but you'll see kind of these services where it's very patriotic. They start, I think recently there was like a creedal confession they all read together. And, inside as a pastor, I'm like kind of dying. I'm like, we have already liturgy. Just use that. We have them. Like, you don't need And so like, there's kind of this hesitation for a lot of people. And I'm not going to live or die by the word nationalism. I mean, Christian, that's one thing, but add the word nationalism. Why do you think nationalism is a useful term? And I want to set it up with a counterpoint already. Like the word social justice, I started asking questions about that because a lot of my friends were like into social justice. And I was like, I think it's a junk term. I think we can't redeem it. And I don't want to use it from the pulpit as like Christianity is about social justice. Like, I don't want to preach that sermon ever, And so like when we think about nationalism, should we not have the same hesitations or concerns, or what made you go, this is fine?
Yeah. I think it's a good question. I mean, some of it is, there's a few answers for me, personally that I give when people are bringing up the question of nationalism. Because some of it it's scary because you look at like the 19th century and the forms that nationalism took, that were the cause of, you know, warfare and things like that. So that's always the scary thing, is like, oh, if we become nationalistic, then, you know, then we're going to want to conquer the world and take over,
Sure.
make, you know, and it's like, well, for one, America already has conquered the world, or what, you know, more or less, like, it's already happened. And so like, you know, global homo nationalism has taken over planet Earth, apart from a few places.
Holdouts,
and so like that's already happened. And two, like, nationalism defined as a contrast from globalism. You know, that's another big one. Is just the question of, is it okay for nations to exist? Right? Sure. Is it okay for the American nation to exist? Is it okay for France to exist as a nation, as a particular people, or China, or Japan, or you know, any of them? Is it okay for that? And so for the anti-nationalist, the person that says like nationalism is sinful and wrong, it's like, well, so then you're saying that like those nations can't exist, that they should, that they're sinning by perpetuating their existence. You know, they should just all be like a deck of cards shuffled up and dispersed around the globe, as just atomized random individuals with no people, place, no ancestors, no descendants. And that's not the way that God made the world at all. No. Like that's, I mean, you run up against reality. You run up against the order of the world that God created. And it's created with actual real people that have families. And I mean, some of it is just like the genesis of the term, or the idea of a nation. Like, what is that? You know, it's you know, people of a common heritage in a particular place. So like, is that bad? Well, no. And so that's how I look at it. Is like, is it okay for America to exist as a particular nation? Yes, that's good and fine. And then secondly, it should be Christian, right? It should be, because this is what Jesus commanded. He commanded his disciples to go into all the nations of the world and baptize them and teach them to observe all he's commanded. And so, and the object is the nation. It isn't just random people. Like, the object of the Great Commission is nations. You get into the grammar, and it is incontrovertible, right? People will try to like skate around it in the Great Commission, and like, well, obviously nations can't be baptized. You don't just dunk them in a thing. I'm like, well, you're sure, but like,
that's still what it says.
What is it? Yeah, what does it say though? Like, Jesus could have, made the caveat there if he wanted to. Yeah. Go in and baptize a bunch of individuals and nations, but he didn't say that. He said, no, all the nations of the world belong to me. Right. Yeah. And you could go through all the Psalms that say that all the nations belong to him. I mean, he won them by dying on the cross and rising from the dead and ascending to reign over them at the right hand of the Father. And so the mission of the church is to bring those nations in. And so if it's okay for America to exist, right, and it's the mission of the church to make America Christian, then the necessary consequence is that this thing of being a Christian nationalist is fine, is good, and it is great. So that's how I look at it, more than just like, because I felt the same way with the social justice thing. You get leery over it, but the connotations with that are such that the baggage is just so much to overcome. And you can just say justice, right?
Sure.
Right. And so anyway, so I can understand how people maybe would be like, I don't know if I like the connotations of nationalism. Well, I get that, but what you're running up against, it's not. You're not doing this in a vacuum, right? In this kind of academic ivory tower way. Well, let's ponder what nationalism means. It's like, well, no, you're operating in this world where the prevailing paradigm is this globalist system that seeks to just gobble up the entire planet and remove all distinctions among people, and turn them into and not in this way that the gospel would do it, where it's like, well, we're all Christians, but you're still from your family. You're still, you're still from Texas. You're still from these places, and you bring all that with you. It's like, no, we're going to strip away everything that makes you unique, and you're just going to be a generic human being. And the gospel doesn't do that. It doesn't. You retain what you are. It takes away sin. Right? That's what it does. So anyway, it's not operating in a vacuum. It's operating in the world as it is, and within this kind of conflict, within this prevailing paradigm that is incredibly destructive to humanity. I mean, like the things that you're describing, I see it too, where people. I mean, I think, we live. I mean, I say this all the time, but like we live in this world that we have such material abundance, even though we've kind of declined economically. The abundance and prosperity that we have is massive. Yet we've never had a generation of people that are so depressed and anxious and despondent. I mean, and suicidal. I mean, that it's like this thick cloud over everything. And I think a lot of it is because, I mean, if people are alone. Right? People are alone and they don't belong anywhere. They don't belong to anyone. They don't have families. They don't have anything. So that's what this does. That's what this system produces in people. And so anyway, it's like you said, it's a threat to political systems, things like that. But it's also a threat to this hold that the system has over everyone. Where now, you bring people in and they begin to live for something that's real and tangible and changes all of every facet of their life. That's a really powerful thing that you're not going to be easily able to stop.
That's right. And I think, if you want to pick up Andrew's book, that'd be great. I think it's a #1 bestseller on Amazon for a time, at least, was it?
It was, yeah. I think it's still doing pretty well.
That's
great. We've done pretty well on Amazon, and it continues to do well, and we're hoping to publish more stuff. So the people that were complaining, they're like, "Oh, it's too short." It's like, well,
get ready.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I think based on reading your book and seeing Stephen Wolf's book, the way I think of your book is like the Busch Light version. Where it's easily accessible, and his is like the Scotch or the bourbon, since bourbon's American. His is like
we should keep it American. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So hopefully that's not insulting. It's not to demean the work.
No. But his is Pappy Van Winkle. The very expensive.
Yeah, there you go.
Bourbon.
There you go. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for being on the pod today. It was great to get to know you better and hear more of your heart and behind the book and behind you being a pastor. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Is there a place, I'm going to point people to your book. Is there a place, a website, anything where people could find out more information about your ministry or about your work?
Well, I write, now I contribute to Gab News. So I write there pretty regularly, pretty frequently. You can see me there on Gab at Boniface Option, or on Twitter at Boniface Option. That's where I'm at. That's
great. All right. Well, if you are a listener and you enjoyed this episode, or maybe you didn't, maybe you hated everything we said, leave us a review and share it with a friend. I want to start good conversations within the church, especially men, to have great conversations about the stuff we're talking about here, because I think there's a lot of stuff going on. And maybe you're like the guy we're talking about. You don't have time to read all these books and these tweets like these lazy pastors. Fair enough. Go pick up his book. It's going to be a great blessing. It'll at least give you something to think about that maybe you haven't thought about before, that hasn't been articulated in a really robust way in a long time. So sign up at the Patreon to keep supporting this channel. Like I've been saying, we're going to be having an episode come out on Guy Mason, the Acts 29 pastor who promoted trans ideology from the pulpit, and I'll be reviewing that, but that's only for Patreon subscribers. So please sign up there so you can get access to that. We already talked about Matt Chandler getting on a leave of absence from the Village there, so you need to be a Patreon to get that content. So go sign up. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.